You remember it, don't you? That warm Saturday light slipping through the dusty windows, the faint hum of a radio tuned to an oldies station, and that smell. A mix of motor oil, sawdust, and time itself. Grandpa's garage wasn't just a place for fixing things. It was a museum of his life, a workshop for memories. You could find tools older than you, jars filled with mysterious screws and half-finished projects waiting for someday. Every item had a story, every dented toolbox a history lesson. Today we're looking at 10 things you'd always find in Grandpa's garage. The treasures that built a generation, one squeaky hinge and rusted bolt at a time. 1. The red metal toolbox. It always sat in the same spot, usually right next to the workbench, heavy enough to throw your back out if you lifted it wrong. That big red metal toolbox wasn't just storage, it was Grandpa's command center. Inside, everything had its place. The flatheads, the Phillips, the wrenches, the tape measure with the bent end. Most of those boxes were made by companies like Craftsman or Snap-on, built back when tools were made of steel, not plastic. The drawers were loud, sticking just a little from decades of grease and use. And inside, the smell of oil, metal, and years of problem solving. To a kid, it was treasure. To Grandpa, it was peace. He could fix anything with what was in that box, or at least he believed he could. That toolbox represented self-reliance, a value born from the Depression and strengthened by wartime thrift. Over time, those old boxes started to disappear, replaced by sleek tool chests and cordless kits. But the old red one, it still stands for a time when fixing something yourself wasn't just practical. It was pride. 2. Mason jars filled with mystery. There they were, rows of mason jars lined up on shelves like soldiers, each one packed with nuts, bolts, nails, washers, or something unidentifiable. No labels, no organization, just a quiet system Grandpa somehow understood. These jars weren't bought for storage. They once held peaches, pickles, or jam made by Grandma. And when the food was gone, they found new life in the garage. It was recycling before anyone called it that. During the 1940s and 50s, folks didn't throw things away. They repurposed everything. To a modern eye, it might have looked messy. But to Grandpa, every jar was a little archive of usefulness. Sometimes you'd watch him twist open a lid and pour out a handful of metal pieces, then pick the exact one he needed without even thinking. It was magic, mechanical intuition. Today, those jars have been replaced by plastic bins and digital inventories. But if you ever come across one in an old garage still filled with screws and dust, it's like shaking hands with history. First, the pegboard wall. You could always tell how serious Grandpa was about his projects by his pegboard wall. Pegs and hooks holding every tool in perfect view. Hammers, pliers, screwdrivers, saws, some even outlined in black marker so he'd know exactly where they went. The pegboard was the heart of his workspace, a symbol of precision and pride. It started catching on after World War II, when suburban homes began featuring workshop corners and garages. Men who'd returned from the war brought home a love for order and efficiency learned in the service. The pegboard became their battlefield of creativity, and every empty hook meant a tool was out there doing its job. Today, most garages rely on power stations and wall cabinets, but that old pegboard, it was personal. Every mark told a story. Every tool had a place. It wasn't about decoration. It was about discipline, learned through decades of hard work. 4. The coffee can, full of nails. You couldn't walk 2 steps without bumping into one. A rusted Folgers can or maybe Maxwell House, overflowing with nails, screws, and whatever fit. They rattled like music whenever you lifted them, the sound of generations building fences, fixing sheds, or mending hearts. Coffee cans were a cheap man's toolbox long before fancy organizers existed. And when coffee came in tin cans instead of plastic tubs, they were too useful to throw away. In post-war America, people learned to stretch every penny. So Grandpa saved everything, just in case. And more often than not, that coffee can save the day. Need a nail? He'd reach in and somehow pull out the exact one you needed. Today, it's a symbol of a simpler kind of wisdom. Never waste what still has worth. That can wasn't clutter. It was preparation. 5. The old push lawn mower. Before roaring gas engines filled the neighborhood with smoke, there was the push mower. 2 wheels, a handle, and a row of blades that spun like scissors as you pushed. It squeaked and clicked in rhythm, the soundtrack of every summer morning. Grandpa loved that sound. It meant progress. Those mowers first appeared in the late 1800s, but they thrived in mid-century America, when every man took pride in a neat lawn. No cords, no fuel, no noise, just effort. Grandpa would say, "It cuts better when you care about it." Maybe he was talking about the grass, maybe about life. Eventually, the push mower gave way to gasoline, then electric, and now robotic machines. But those quiet mornings with the smell of fresh-cut grass and the squeak of steel will always belong to that humble, human-powered invention. 6. The radio on the shelf. It was never loud, never off. Perched high on a shelf covered in dust and stickers, that old radio filled the garage with the voice of America. Maybe it was baseball on a Sunday afternoon, maybe Johnny Cash on AM. You could hear it hum even when the tools went silent. Radios like that were built in the 50s and 60s, sturdy, reliable, often tuned with a simple dial and wire antenna. For Grandpa, it wasn't background noise. It was company. When you spend hours alone tinkering, that voice kept you grounded, connected. The static between stations felt almost comforting. Today, it's podcasts and Bluetooth speakers, but nothing sounds quite like that old analog warmth, the crackle, the depth, the nostalgia baked into every broadcast. 7. The workbench stained with time. The centerpiece of every garage, the workbench, scratched, stained, and scarred from decades of projects. If that bench could talk, it would tell stories of broken radios, birdhouses, and bicycle repairs. It was built, not bought, sometimes from scrap wood or leftover lumber. Every dent had meaning. Every mark was a memory. A vise was usually clamped on one side, holding onto dreams and broken gadgets alike. Workbenches like these were symbols of patience. They taught kids how to measure twice, cut once, and clean up when you're done. They smelled like varnish and oil and hard work. Now, many of them sit unused, replaced by shiny prefab tables. But no factory-built surface will ever carry the same soul as Grandpa's old workbench, a monument to craftsmanship, the rusty bicycle or old engine. In the corner, half hidden behind boxes, there was always something mid-project. An old bike, a motorcycle engine, maybe even a lawnmower halfway fixed. Grandpa was a tinkerer. He couldn't leave things alone. Those someday projects gave him purpose. Even when time slowed him down, that engine represented curiosity that never retired. Back in the 50s and 60s, fixing things was part of being a man. If something broke, you repaired it. Not because you had to, but because you could. And every unfinished project was a dream still alive. That rusted machine in the corner, it wasn't failure. It was faith that one day he'd finish it. Today we throw away what's broken, but Grandpa's garage reminds us that patience can bring anything back to life. 9. The coffee thermos. You'd see it sitting next to the drill or on the windowsill, dented, maybe missing its cap, but still holding strong. That green Stanley thermos was practically family. Every morning, Grandpa would fill it before heading to work, and on weekends it came with him to the garage. The smell of hot coffee mixed with the cold scent of metal. That was his comfort. The Stanley brand became iconic during the early 20th century, known for durability. Those thermoses went to construction sites, fishing trips, and long drives. They outlived appliances, outlasted jobs, sometimes even outlived their owners. For Grandpa, it wasn't just about coffee. It was about ritual, the pause between tasks, the breath before trying again. Today we've got travel mugs and smart cups, but that old thermos? It's a relic of reliability, solid, simple, and always there when you needed it. 10. The family photos taped to the wall. Among the tools in the dust, there was always something tender. A few faded Polaroids taped to the wall. Grandkids, pets, maybe a wedding photo yellowed with age. They didn't belong in a garage, but that's where Grandpa wanted them. Because to him, those faces were the reason he fixed, built, and mended things. A garage might look like a man's domain, but in truth, it was built on love. The quiet kind, shown through action. Every nail hammered, every board sanded was for someone he cared about. Those photos made the space human, and even when the tools rust and the walls crumble, those memories don't fade. They're the heart of what made Grandpa's garage more than just a place. It was a story of family, frozen in time. Maybe Grandpa's gone now. Maybe his garage stands empty, quiet except for the echoes of the past. But if you step inside and breathe deep, you can still feel him there. In every jar, every tool, every drop of oil on the floor. Because that garage wasn't just where he worked. It was where he lived his values, patience, pride, and purpose. Things wear out, people move on, but the lessons in that old garage, they stay. If this brought back a memory, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And tell us, what was the one thing you'll always remember from your grandpa's garage?